see some of our colleagues, private sector, and also law enforcement in the audience, so thank you very much for joining. But for our panelists here, before we do the introductions, by show of hands, how many are American in the audience here? Okay, one American. How many Canadian? Majority Canadian, okay. How many French? French, okay, okay. Europe, beyond France? Okay, so majority Canadian. This is going to be an all-English panel. There will be questions at the end. We'll allot about 10 minutes for questions as well. So without further ado, we'll do some introductions here. My name is Brian. I'm the attaché here in Canada. I'm with the FBI. I'm an agent, supervisory special agent. I oversee the cyber portfolio from a national security, intelligence, and cyber criminal perspective as well, both with the intelligence side and also with the cyber criminal law enforcement side. Also, we have Director General Chris Lynham from the RCMP, National Cyber Crime Coordination Center. He oversees the federal policing infrastructure that also works with our police of jurisdictions for our American friends, state and locals, if you will. Then we also have Secret Service Senior Agent, who's also stationed out of Canada. We have Steve Greer. And then we also have Jason, who was on a panel earlier today. He's an agent, also stationed out of Ottawa, working the cyber portfolio with Canadian partners. And then we have Sûreté du Québec. That's the Quebec Provincial Police. We have Andrée DUPUIS. Hi, Andrée. We put you in the middle so that you can tell us all that we're wrong and explain it to us in the correct way things should be done. And then, very unique here, right? Normally, and if you were here at the panels last year, partnerships and the discussion of partnerships, we either had private sector up here talking about the importance, or we had just law enforcement. But today we have the Business Council of Canada, VP, Trevor NEIMAN, and he'll be a part of the panel. So again, to talk about this a little bit more, last year we talked very much about the theory or the idea of collaboration. Today we're going to talk real talk about ways to do it, the processes that work and don't work, what makes it very difficult, some of the best practices, and then we'll open it up for questions. As you can see, it's not just law enforcement, there's intelligence, there's private sector from different agencies and different countries. In the future, we're missing some other countries and maybe another important party, a little bit of a challenge, but maybe we can have a lawyer up here to have that little optic as well. That may grind to a halt because of the lawyer part, but we'll see how that goes, okay? So to set the stage really quick, and can everyone hear me okay? Yep. To set the stage really quick, Canada, United States, obviously allies, part of the Five Eyes Alliance. Interesting. The unique component that we have with Canada, with the US, is that we share a significant amount of border. In addition, amongst us, 365 million people. We are also primary trading partners as well. We're Canada's #1 trading partner, I believe, Trevor, right? And Canada is #2 as well. Now, look at that border, that line. However, we share intertwined energy, transportation, critical infrastructure, finance, manufacturing, and technology. What makes us think, right? While we're two separate countries, we share one landmass, and the way in which we're configured is extremely incestuous from a critical infrastructure standpoint, which makes collaboration key, right? And over the last couple years, what we've been doing is trying to examine different models of how to do that, and in an iterative and trust-based way, we've been able to get there, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Trevor first. Trevor, Business Council of Canada. Can you explain to us what the Business Council of Canada is, and help us understand that before we launch right into the conversation?
Thanks very much, Brian. Hopefully you can all hear me. Nods. Yep. All right, so the Business Council of Canada is an industry association that represents approximately 170 of Canada's leading CEOs. These are Canada's largest, most successful business in every single major sector of the region of the country. to situate ourselves internationally, because there are some folks from outside the country, our counterparts in the United States would be the Business Roundtable. In the United Kingdom, it would be the Confederation of British Industries, and in the European Union, it would be Business Europe. In Canada, our members collectively support approximately 6 million Canadian workers. Our members generate approximately $2 trillion in global revenues annually, and we represent the vast majority of Canada's exports to the world, as well as the value of the Toronto Stock Exchange, Canadian sector private investment in research and development. Our members are global in outlook, given that Canada is very much a trading nation. So for instance, 4 to 5 of our members have operations in the United States. Many of those operations are actually bigger than their Canadian footprint. And as I mentioned off the top, we are an advocacy organization. That means we weigh in on public policy matters that affect the ability of large businesses to innovate, compete, and grow. A major priority for us going forward is strengthening the connective tissue between the public and private sectors so that we can collectively detect, deter, and disrupt economic and national security threats to our country, as well as to North America and the broader Five Eyes, G7, NATO alliance.
Thanks, Trevor. Really quick, can you tell us the reason why we're here to talk about cyber threats, cybersecurity, cyber crime specifically here on this red stage? Where does cyber sit in the boardroom within Canada?
So thanks, Brian. Cybersecurity is not new, dealing with threats for some time now. So I'd say that cybersecurity has been a top priority in Canadian boardrooms and amongst business leaders for a number of years, but we're at a turning point. We've seen some increased profile. And so focus on this issue is like it's never been before. In a recent survey last month, 3/4 of our chief executive officers described cyber attacks as being the single greatest threat to their ability to grow and compete. And so with increased threats by malicious cyber actors, our members are dedicating increased resources to protect their operations in the communities which they operate in. So just in the critical infrastructure space, telecoms, banking, and your transportation, an average business council member spends approximately $100 million on cybersecurity in Canada per year, with a sizable minority of our members spending $500 million or more within a given year. But I want to emphasize that our members are not just looking at cybersecurity in terms of risks to their business. They also see it as a tremendous business opportunity, a way for them to differentiate themselves in a really crowded marketplace. So they look at their commitment to enhance cybersecurity as a way to show to their customers, their clients, even their employees, that they are going to take their confidential information seriously, protect it, use it responsibly, and this is going to give them a leg up in a competitive marketplace by facilitating more commerce and innovation.
Thanks, Trevor. So from the corporate side, the business side, clearly a priority, seen as a business risk, conversations are being had, there's a necessity and there's an acknowledgement that no one corporate agency can do this on their own, and they need to find a way to better collaborate and share. So that's the tone from the boardroom. Chris, with you seeing that law enforcement, all of Canada enterprise component with private sector engagement, where does that sit now within the priority of the RCMP?
Yeah, great question, Brian. I would say if you asked me that question 5 years ago, it probably wasn't a priority, or at least it wasn't a high enough priority. But what you've seen over the last 5 years is the scale of attacks and what Trevor's members see and individual Canadians see in terms of being impacted by cybercrime every day, that this is such a challenge that there's not a law enforcement agency in Canada that isn't feeling overwhelmed by whether what they see get reported to them or what they don't get reported to them. And what it's really caused is a different mindset, and that's that, okay, if we are really going to go after, law enforcement are going to come at it from two perspectives primarily. One, to try and work with different organizations to prevent cybercrime from happening, or two, primarily to go after those responsible for it. So what's happened in that shift in the last 5 years is that if we're going to do this effectively, we've got no choice but to change how policing has traditionally worked and figure out how to work more collaboratively with the private sector. We often talk about trying to trying to figure out different ways. Every private sector organization is going to have a different sort of comfort level with working with police. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that they've got options, and as you'll hear a little bit more today, is do things about countering misperceptions, figuring out ways so ideally before anything gets hacked, there's a relationship set up. That doesn't happen in a lot of other types of policing. You don't set up another crime type. But it's super important that we do that now. And then so when police respond, or when they're trying to reduce the harm that victims are feeling, we've got that relationship built, and we're figuring out different things on what I call the partnership menu that law enforcement and private sector can choose to go after cyber criminals and make everybody more safe. So maybe I'll stop there, Brian.
Thanks, Chris. So from the federal side, huge perspective, corporatized national federal policing, a priority. Now, Andrée, you talk to cyber victims quite a bit, right? You engage with them, you need their information, they need your support so that they can get up and running, but at the same time, you need their information, hopefully convert that into evidence. Tell us about the role of private sector in your work, your investigations, and the importance of bringing them into the fray so they can be a part of it in order to enrich what you're doing at the investigative level.
Right, so obviously private sector is very important for us, and what we see on the ground as a first responder is that there's a lot of misconceptions about both what we're doing, what we want to get to, and when we engage with the victims, sometimes they won't even want to file a complaint and they won't tell us anything. But once we explain how we can help them, what we need to know about the case, now they are all in. They want to help us fight the cyber crimes. And then, so when we get to talk to each other, it goes better. And then a few days or weeks go by because we let you handle the crisis, because you are handling a crisis, right? And then when we call back to investigate, get more details, that's where we meet the lawyers, right? Okay, so that being said, again, a lot of misconception, all right? So we need to talk, and we understand all the risk you are taking. We understand the importance of confidentiality, and we want to work with you guys. So just keep engaging with us, and we will find a way to help each other out and then move forward.
Thanks, Andrée. Appreciate that. So quick question before I pump it over to Jason here is, can you successfully investigate a cyber intrusion investigation without any private sector engagement? Or by default, you're most likely going to have to talk to some sort of private sector partner? Yeah,
obviously you know the answer to that. So no, it's important. We have to work together. If you don't talk to us, if we don't work together, we're not going to go anywhere. Because if we don't know who is attacking you, if we don't know what's going on, we cannot prioritize our investigations. We cannot figure out what's important to you. So that's why we need to work together, obviously.
I was just going to echo or reinforce some of what Andrée was saying, and even from a little bit of a different spin that maybe folks hadn't thought about. So, you know, Andrée and a lot of her other police of jurisdiction, they really focus on an investigative piece. But there's another piece where often now increasingly what law enforcement are doing is reaching out to victims or potential victims. When we see potential hacks or compromises, we now have a network of international partners and even some, you know, in other sectors where we see a victim being attacked in real time, and we want to reach out to them and give them that notice so they can take that measures. And so I flagged this, and I'll even give a real tangible example. Folks might have been aware of the Hive ransomware group, a Russian-based group, a very vicious group that specifically targeted healthcare systems and hospitals. And there was an effort, a multinational effort over a couple of years led by the FBI, where they were going after the Hive ransomware group. And this culminated in a takedown of Hive infrastructure in January 2023. But what was happening, and this is where I want to demonstrate how law enforcement, both in Canada and the US and elsewhere, have really kind of changed their mindset. While that investigation was going on, what was happening in the background was the FBI had great visibility on the communications of Hive. And they could see when a victim, when Hive was going to spin up and attack a victim. And so what they started to do is they started reaching out to those victims. And when it was an international victim here in Canada, they would come to the National Cybercrime Coordination Center, and then we would go out and call that victim. And you can imagine, we would cold call them, right out of the blue. And you can imagine if you're the IT person or the CISO on the other end of that, and you get that call and you don't have a relationship with us, your first probably indication, this is a scam, right? So what was happening, and very, we did this in over 60 times in Canada where we warned victims, and then we were able to take it to another level with the help of the FBI, where they were getting a copy of the decryptor key that Hive was using, and we were able to facilitate to get that decryptor key into the hands of the victim, so they could decrypt their systems, not pay, and not experience the full damage that could occur. We were able to do that 8 times in Canada. And so I put that out there as one, an example of beyond investigations. This is what law enforcement is doing now. And 2, how much it's important to have that relationship built before something bad happens.
Thanks, Chris. Now that anecdotal story really hits home. We've been very busy in trying to operate in the left of intrusion space, right, Jason? We, as law enforcement investigators, we don't want to get to an investigation. If we did all the work up front and we shared and we found better ways to communicate with private sector and share with them what it is we're seeing, prevention would be the key, right? And so, Jason, from the US side, from Department of Homeland Security investigations perspective, with you as an agent, what can be done left of intrusion? Left of bang is how we say it in the CT world, right? So what can be done there?
So we're all here for cybersecurity. You can't talk about cybersecurity, let's talk about cybercrime. And if cybercrime is a problem for you guys in the private sector, it's a problem for us in law enforcement. So if we can work together, we can have a solution to prevent cybercrime. And I've seen a lot of kind of mindset change in all of our agencies where, I've been on the job 16 years, started in Miami, you got to go arrest, seize assets, convictions. Well, now we're changing our metrics and the way we're tracking things into disruptions. And it's kind of hard for the old school policing to think about, well, you didn't arrest anybody. But yeah, we kicked out a hacker in a basement operating or a nation state out of a network. So we prevented cybercrime, we prevented that data exfiltration or the $1 million mitigation it would take if it was a horrible ransomware incident. So working together and actually meeting as human beings during, say, a working lunch. And I tell a lot of our investigators in the field, when I was at Cybercrime's headquarters building out the cybersecurity outreaches, no company's going to turn you down from listening to a cyber cop for 30 minutes about cybersecurity. Like, how cool is that to be the CSO of a hospital and you've got this free resource from SQ or the RCMP or the local Montreal police, talking locally here, to come talk about cyber hygiene and cyber best practices and what to do if you are breached and you have to call somebody. So it's not, Andrée's team showing up for the first time going, oh, hey, I know everything's on fire and you're trying to put it out. I need to know this and I need to know this, and oh, you want me to come back in a couple hours? I'll just sit here and watch you go through probably the worst time in your job as an IT professional. So I think meeting in person as human beings, getting to know each other, and then having that resource, and you guys here in Canada have a plethora of resources from CCCS to the RCMP-NC3, your local provincial police here in Quebec, and that's why we're here as well as cyber liaisons operating in Canada at the U.S. Embassy and with our Canadian counterparts.
Thanks, Jason. Let's come at it now from a different angle, right? We also have U.S. Secret Service up here on the panel in Mr. Greer over here. There are 2 primary business lines for the Secret Service. Everything that you see in the movies where they do the protection of our government executives, like the president, all the way on down. And then also cyber investigative financial crimes as well, when they're not protecting the president. The reason why I asked Greer to be on the panel today is to think about cyber from a different perspective, from a protection perspective. Think about the role of protection that Greer has to undertake. Every time that there's travel of a government executive, there's a lot of activity that has to be done left of the incident, where in law enforcement, we get our statistics, or we get our A+, or our 100% every year because of the number of arrests, disruptions, warrants we issue. A very boring day where nothing happens for Greer is the best day in the world, right? So Steve, can you talk a little bit about that protection mindset and rip out cyber for a little bit and just talk to us about the importance of getting things done before the actual day of?
Well, right. I can't stress the importance of the relationships that we've made. You know, we go out in advance of these protectees 8, 10, 14, 20 days in order to mitigate and prevent any of these, threats that are thrown at us. These advances are very comprehensive. We meet with the local partners. We start off with the law enforcement entities, federal, state, local, or provincial in this case. We meet with the host committees. Maybe we're doing an event at the Bell Center or the Scotiabank Center, and we meet with those directors of security and other important people at these establishments and the surrounding businesses. They might have intelligence on the ground that we may not have access to. That's kind of where during our advances, that's where we kind of make our bread and butter. The more time we have, the more people we can collaborate with. Now, on the intelligence side, we also get a lot of threats, through social media. And so back in DC, we have task forces with, our other partners with Homeland Security and the FBI, where we share information with regards to the threats that they're seeing through social media. And then through our partners with the private sector, whether it's Twitter, X, Gmail, Google, all those other social media entities, we have a direct line to them to say, hey, we saw this, or maybe they reached out to us to say they're seeing this, and they're making us aware, and we try to figure out, who this person is that's posting these threats. We can find out, is this somebody just trying to shock the conscious, or is this somebody that is a direct threat to a particular visit or protectee? So we depend on those relationships. Those advances are very important, and we can't do this on our own. I mean, we're not a very large agency. We depend on, a host of other entities coming together to help us, complete our mission. And as Brian just indicated, we'll never know whether or not that was the attack that was going to be prevented. Like, a good day for us is a very boring day, as he stated. Our agency exists to just try to stay out of the headlines for the most part.
No, that's really good. At the Bureau, somehow we continue to make the headlines for good or bad, right? So, needless to say, all these perspectives in aggregate, that's the ecosystem that we're contending with. I wanted to flip it over to Trevor again. Every time we engage with our private sector partners, it's amazing because oh, go ahead.
They've changed it.
Oh, did they change it? Oh, you lost us? Okay. Test, test, test. We're good? Okay. All right, can you guys hear me? 5 or 6. 6. We're good? Good. All right, see what just happened? Private sector collaboration. No, just kidding. Okay, so Trevor, let me flip it over to you really quick. So every time we engage with private sector, law enforcement, intelligence community, we learn a lot. We learn different perspectives. We learn about information. We understand the business side and learn more and gain more empathy about what private sector has to contend with within the cyberspace. It's very interesting. Last time we engaged with Trevor brought up what he and his organization call the 3 A's regarding cyber. So can you break that down, and then we can pivot off with some conversation with the 3 A's.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So what Brian's referring to is the Business Council of Canada's general approach to building partnerships with government. And as he mentions, there's the 3 A's. So there's the first is awareness, the second is assembling, and the third is advocacy. In terms of awareness, we use our members' meetings, which are the largest gatherings of major Canadian CEOs in any given place or time in the country, to raise the business community's awareness of new and emerging economic security threats. So for instance, last May, our group of CEOs was down in Washington, D.C. to meet with the U.S. Director of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, Jen Easterly. And that was an opportunity for major CEOs, many of which operate cross-border critical infrastructure, to learn about threats to that infrastructure in light of Russia's ongoing invasion and occupation of Ukraine. So that's the first A, awareness. The second A, as I mentioned, is assembly. And what I'm talking about here is the Business Council of Canada serving as a platform for collaboration between the public and private sector. We're trying to strengthen that connective tissue or that bond that serves as a platform for collaboration. So an initiative that we launched, or will be launching actually later this fall, in partnership with the FBI, the RCMP, and other Canadian and American agencies is a tabletop exercise, a cybersecurity tabletop exercise that's going to test some of the relationships, the proactive relationships that we've built to ensure that those relationships are working well. And this will be in the context of a major cyber incident that has a cross-border component. So that's the second A, assembling. The third A is advocacy, and that's really the bread and butter for the Business Council. We're an advocacy organization. We're pushing for policies that make Canada a better place. And so in this space, we're really trying to strengthen partnerships with the government, as well as give businesses the ability to deter, detect, and disrupt threats. And so most recently under this A, we launched a new paper last September, which is called Economic Security is National Security, and it calls for the Government of Canada to introduce a new national security strategy that for the first time puts economic security front and center. This would be piggybacking on some of the efforts that Canada's closest allies have done. The United States, Germany, and Japan have all introduced national security strategies in this space. Canada hasn't done in 20 years. So through these three different interconnected initiatives, we're making some good progress in terms of building partnerships and moving the dial also on public policy. But there is a lot of work that continues to need to be done, including at our political level.
Thanks, Trevor. So let me just repeat this really quick. It's the 3 A's. We have awareness, assembly, and advocacy. Right. So when I think of awareness, I think intel sharing, which is one of the biggest elephants amongst many elephants in the room. Intelligence sharing, information sharing. When I think of assembly, I think of joint efforts, joint operations, joint exercises, etc., right? Making sure that we're practiced before things actually happen, so that when we have to execute an incident response plan, we've done this before. The communication lines are already open, and that channeling is already there. And then from the advocacy side, it's what can we push well beyond, what our main role is? How can we influence, like what we're doing right now, advocating, telling the story? So Chris, awareness, assembly, advocacy, intel sharing, right? Joint operations, trust building, advocacy, etc. What are the things that you're seeing from your enterprise law enforcement optic that can be helpful towards this conversation?
Great questions again, Brian. I mean, you really kind of laid out probably all of them. What I would say on the information sharing side of things, and Andrée talked about this, when the lawyers get involved, it can get complex, but that's actually their role, right? They want to protect their client. They're worried about legal liability. They're worried about reputational aspects and other things. So what we're trying to push a lot for is, okay, let's build that relationship ahead of time, but then let's actually try and work through some of those impediments so that both sides can feel comfortable, particularly either before an incident or during, on how to share information and figure out how it'll work. So I'll just give you one quick example was, put a little more context, is police operate exclusively by what we call the third-party rule. And what this means is if police share with others, if I give information to Andrée and then she wants to use it for something that's going to cause some kind of action, she needs to come back to me and make sure I'm okay with that. That principle in policing has existed, almost forever. It is almost identical to how the traffic light protocol kind of system works. So where I'm going with this is we actually have the same sort of approaches of like how information sharing works. But where we needed to get to now is figure out the sort of detailed questions and information that lawyers will allow their clients to answer and not worry about things like legal privilege or liability. So we brought a bunch of lawyers, we put lawyers in a room, we put law enforcement for a room, we locked them for a day, and we said, let's work through what happens during an incident and see if we can come up with some sort of standardized questions to help streamline that process. And we call that our ransomware questionnaire. And we had great success. Everyone saw what everyone was trying to achieve, and it was super collaborative. And we're going to try and roll that out so that all the police service in Canada, if they want to use it, and lawyers, that they'll have it as well.
Thanks, Chris. Huge takeaway. So you have a CEO on one side, right, and you have a government law enforcement executive on this side, and they are telling each other, hey, we need to find a way to share, right? But somewhere in between are an army of lawyers. And if there's collaboration that's happening at the endpoints, everywhere in between there needs to be collaboration as well. So that's one of those takeaways. I know we're actively working on that sort of model and smoothing that out right now. Conversations with Trevor and his constituents as well. Andrée, when engaging at the investigative level again, how does that manifest itself with you? Are you seeing it smoothing out a little bit? Are you seeing it getting better? Are you still getting the same sort of friction 2 years ago, today? How is it looking, and what are some of the best practices that you're implementing to get there?
I would say, well, it doesn't, I wouldn't say it's getting better, because we're always starting at zero, because like for you, it's quite often the first time you've been hit by a cybercrime. So not better in that way, but better in a way that we, as Jason said, and also Chris, there's been a change in the mindset of how we tackle cybercrime, which is the borderless view. And so when we engage, and when you tell us like, okay, I'm not open to giving you this, all right, so maybe you can give me something else. And that, for me, is a piece of the bigger puzzle, because that's how we tackle cybercrime. We do it internationally, we share with our international partners, and like, of course, we're gonna ask for whatever we can get our hands on, but if you're not open to that, give us whatever you can, and that might be an important piece for us. Or maybe sometimes also what we see in the field is that, oh, well, my incident is we had backups and everything's up and running, so it's not a big case, but maybe for you. But for me, the same threat actor maybe targeted a hospital in France 2 weeks before. So maybe the threat actor left some small pieces of evidence in your system, in your network, and I need that. So try to keep a bigger picture. And so we got better explaining this, and so that's what we see on the field.
So when we think of cybercrime, or when I think of a cybercrime incident, it reminds me of kidnapping investigations, right, Jason? I mean, it reminds us of kidnapping investigations. The first 24 matter. Every minute that goes by after an incident, it gets exponentially more difficult to investigate. The breadcrumbs start to go away, the evidence starts to dissipate, right? So there's a heavy premium that should be placed on proactive and pre-established relationships. I know that, Jason, your agency has been extremely intentional in establishing that type of mindset with US private sector partners, where sometimes the blurring of the lines between public and private, it's kind of hard to identify now. Can you share some of those models, task forces, embeds, et cetera, if you can explain that to everybody?
Sure. So there's a lot of things that just make sense when you go and talk to the private sector, you guys. So our agency, previous 9/11, was U.S. Customs, big financial investigation. So it makes sense to have a relationship with the money service businesses, the bankings. They see the value in it. They could save money by preventing some fraud as well. Child exploitation investigations, that's always a no-brainer for everybody. I kind of use that as a model for information sharing, because we have to partner up with the non-government organizations, do outreaches to schools to prevent that type of, horrendous crime. And now, in the last handful of years, we've shifted to, why don't we do that in cybersecurity, in the private sector? So actually having embeds at the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance, which we have an embed, Secret Service hasn't been there as well, between New York, Pittsburgh, LA, FBI, and our partners with the RCMP. And that's a public-private partnership where there's financial institutions, law enforcement agencies from different countries, from local police up to federal, internationally, with all the end goal to combat financial fraud and cyber-enabled crime. So we've actually extended some of our cyber intrusion investigators to private software companies, to money service businesses. We've also taken some of our partners who are combating cybercrime, like cyber threat intelligence companies and cryptocurrency tracing companies, and bring them to our cybercrime center. And congratulations, you're now full-time with us to help combat cyber-enabled and cyber-dependent crime, because we know that, once again, the theme of is no one can do it on their own.
No, So I just want to be mindful of time before we get some comments from Greer over here. We have 10 minutes left. Who has questions so far? If you have questions, if you will please come up to the mic so we can get an understanding and imagine that time frame. We have other questions queued up for everyone up here, but if we do want to hear from the audience, if you do have questions on or statements about best practices or curiosities, please let us know. You have an international group here from different mountaintops that can help enrich what it is you're thinking about. Until then, Greer, what else do you have to add about some of the best ways to achieve that awareness, the assembly, the advocacy?
Well, look, the history of the Secret Service is rooted in financial crimes. So we have had a long-standing relationship with the banking structures, and this is where we've kind of established ourselves in the, especially currently with the cyber stuff. For example, I was on a protection assignment literally last week in Halifax, and working with RCMP's Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, I get an email indicating there was a charitable organization that was victimized, through a business email compromise. And in that report, I had the information that I needed to go to a friend of mine within the suspect's, bank that he was using, one of the big ones in the U.S. And I had a friend that worked in their fraud investigations, called them, asked them to take a look at the account. And they say, well, coincidentally, that account's been flagged for fraud, and I see this wire. It's sitting in a suspense account right now. I need certain documentations, a whole harmless bond of indemnity or whatever, to have the money returned. I can immediately call back to the victim and tell that charitable organization, like, hey, you need to go to your victim bank, tell them to fill out this paperwork and send it to the email addresses I'm about to provide you with. Once you get that done, that'll initiate the process to get the money returned. All this is done within the span of about 30 minutes, and the money was returned within 30 days. And that's based on the relationships that we've made. So in my experience, it's been, when you become a victim and you build a relationship, the idea is to build a relationship long before this happens, but once you establish a relationship, now there's a level of trust between everybody involved, and it just helps the process move much more smooth. That's just a real life example.
Thanks, Greer. Appreciate it. Yeah. So before I go to the last question, so everyone here on the panel can think about it, is what can the if you're private sector, what can law enforcement do better? If you're law enforcement, what can private sector do better? If you want, I'll answer it a different way. That's fine as well. But some of the themes, and I want to highlight here the importance of intelligence or information sharing. Who's private sector here, by the way, if you can raise your hand? So law enforcement, who's law enforcement here? Okay, and then like 33% don't want to raise their hand either. So, okay. So now the macro problem that law enforcement contends with every day, there's that term jurisdiction. Here in Canada, it's the term police of jurisdiction. SQ has the jurisdiction and responsible for the jurisdiction of Quebec. The people we are sworn to protect and serve continue to be victimized by actors who are well beyond our country and our jurisdictions. And they are utilizing tools, communication, malware, infrastructure that are dispersed throughout the globe on perishable infrastructure. That's the problem we have to solve. And the fundamentals of investigations are following the money and following the communications. Everything is in the holdings of private sector. We have ways to achieve and obtain that information, obviously through jurisdictional means, but there's also that second category, which is relationships. So we could move at the speed of courts, or we can move at the speed of relationships, trust, and also, you know, the court system as well. But steeped into all of those little parallels is relationships, right? So that's what I wanted to share. The second piece is that your information matters. Kind of like what Andrée was saying earlier, is when speaking with a private sector partner, some of the private sector victims, they say, oh, this is not important, but we'll just share with this to you anyway. You probably already know it. Don't take that for granted. Share it with us. Your pocketlet can be someone else's gold or the piece of that puzzle, right? We are not just going after the actors. We're going after the users. We're going after the toolkits. We're going after the communication infrastructure. We're going after the finances. Cybercrime is a business. It's a business. And the actors collaborate faster and they innovate faster than the law enforcement and the private sector community collaborate with each other. So that's the challenge that we relay to you. Now, you have some time to think about it. We'll go in the same order. Trevor, you first. What can law enforcement do better moving forward?
Yeah, so I have two recommendations for government, and I do have one for the private sector. So my first recommendation, it's not just specific to law enforcement, but just working more generally with government. In Canada, at least, it's very complicated for businesses to navigate the complexities working with government. You know, we have a variety of organizations, departments, agencies, bureaus that have some sort of cybersecurity mandate, including at different levels of government, you know, municipal, provincial, and federal government. Just at the federal level alone, you know, we have public safety, we have Department of Industry, we have Department of Defense, we have CSIS, TSE, the Cyber Center, as well as sector-specific regulators. So it's really tricky for businesses to navigate all of those different agencies. And since responsibility is diffuse across the ecosystem, sometimes you know, some of the requests from industry will slip through a crack. So for businesses, I think we need to be a lot clearer in terms of who's responsible for what, in terms of defining responsibilities and accountability behind that. That's recommendation number one. Recommendation number two, this is not so much for law enforcement, it's more for lawmakers out there, is that we need to make it much easier for businesses to collaborate with government. And I'll just give one very niche example just to show, you know, to provide some color, I think, to this challenge. You know, so recently, working on putting up a tabletop exercise to, you know, test public and private sector responses to a cyber attack. The first thing we needed to do before we could even start talking about the scenario was hire a competition lawyer, because there was competitors in the room and we needed to ensure that we were on the Competition Act. And trust me, having, you know, a competition lawyer, you know, agreeing on a single lawyer that's a third party that doesn't represent conflicts between, you know, some industry representatives, it's very tricky. It just slows things down. So governments need to create safe harbors. They need to reduce obstacles. One of the things they could do is to amend the Competition Act to say that when collaborators when competitors are collaborating, no anti-competitive effects, that should be okay. So the government needs to make it easier for the public and private sector to work together. And then just to kind of pivot, for the private sector, we need to be humble. We need to understand that we don't have all the answers, that we have information blind spots, we don't have all the tools, so we certainly don't have the legal authorities. So we need to be really open to working collaboratively with government. There's so many advantages to doing so. You know, you talk about sharing decryption codes to unlock systems that are somewhere. That's just one example, but there's a lot that the private sector can take advantage of from collaboration. So we need to be open to those relationships and truly come to them with the spirit of cooperative partnership.
Thanks, Trevor. In closure, we got maybe a half a minute, Chris, and then a half a minute, Jason. Okay. That's okay?
I'll just say two quick things. One, from the law enforcement, we need to do a better job, and with our government partners as well, of explaining how it works when you call or you seek assistance. I use the analogy of 911. Pretty much everybody knows when you call 911, police, fire, and ambulance, and you kind of know what each one of those do and generally how they work together. We need to do the same thing in cyber, but still recognizing that you're going to get a different service or output from each one of those, and it's the same, you know, from law enforcement, other government partners, what have you. And then I would just say, from the private sector folks or just others, have some faith. Reach out to law enforcement when you are having an incident. Ideally have that relationship ahead of time, but have some faith that they are going to help you When you do engage, you call sort of the general reporting, ask to speak to someone who works in a cybercrime unit so that they can get you the right people.
Thanks, Chris. Jason, can you bring it home for us?
So I'm going to use an analogy from, I'm still a comic book, a Marvel nerd. So, and Brian and I and our partners at the embassy kind of joked that we're like the cyber Avengers, because really I'd like to be Iron Man and not a federal agent. But I think it's a good example of no one can do it alone. So we have, you know, our cyber Avengers up here, and we've got Trevor as an honorary member from the private sector. So things are happening. We keep talking about things are getting better. So, you know, when you go back to your offices, your homes, and you discuss building relationships with the public sector, kind of think about that. Thor cannot defeat Thanos on his own, correct? That's why there's the Avengers. So partner up and give it a try. You know, it's not going to hurt.
Thanks very much. We're going to be here. We'll sit tight. If you have any questions, you want to reach out to us, please let us know. Thanks a lot for taking the time. We know that you have an option to go to other panels. Thanks for choosing ours. Appreciate it. Thanks.